Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Expat Women's Workshop. This is the third in our quarterly series of workshops focused on an ongoing dialogue about the unique set of challenges and opportunities that are faced by expat women. Before we begin, I just want to mention that we'll be recording today's session and we'll be putting everyone on mute until the Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the meeting. If you prefer not to have the Q&A session recorded, just please type that into the chat box. Also, if you feel comfortable, let's turn on our cameras so that we can see each other. So let's begin. During our last workshop, our speaker, Anita Sheehan, talked about ways in which we perceive ourselves and how to strengthen our sense of self-worth. We had lots of great practical advice and we had great feedback from that session. And we are continuing on the topic of well-being. So today, our guest, Marjolein, will discuss the harmful impact that stress has on our hormones and what we can do about it. So definitely looking forward to the practical advice on well-being. A little bit of background about Marjolein. She's a registered nutritionist with a focus on women's health. She has been working in the health and wellness industry since 2015. And really, after experiencing burnout in her early 20s and discovering that it was in fact a chronic condition, Marjolein's mission is to make sure that women know there is always another way to support your health and improve your symptoms if you want to. Since qualifying as a nutritional therapist in 2018, Marjolein has helped hundreds of women globally to really transform their health and their relationship with food and their bodies. Marjolein has been featured as an expert and stylist in the Moment magazine. Now, she also provides consultancy in the wellness space for businesses and works with women one-on-one to really navigate their health issues. So Marjolein, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Anya, thanks so much for having me. When we first chatted about your ideas for the group and the fact that you wanted to support expat women, I was completely on board. So I'm really happy to be here. So today's topic around banishing burnout and how to take back control of our hormones. I really want to touch on what's going on in our bodies. And yeah, some real takeaways to be able to implement from today. Hopefully we'll see how much time everyone's got today to start implementing. But I'd love to start by asking you to imagine the feeling of being on a roller coaster. So you're in your carriage and you're kind of hurtling up to quite a height, and then it stops suddenly and the anticipation builds and it builds, and then suddenly you're dropped off the edge of your roller coaster and you get those stomach flips. Now, the reason I ask you to imagine that is because on a roller coaster, it's completely normal. But when we're experiencing these kind of feelings on a day-to-day basis, it's just another sign from the body that something is going on. And quite a number of years ago now, I was having dinner with some close friends and I mentioned this sensation and I said, oh, you know, your stomach drop feeling when you're on a roller coaster. And they said, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And I said, oh, I'm getting it at the moment about 5 or 6 times a day. And they said, oh, that's not normal. I don't think that's okay. And so I thought, right, there's a problem here. Did I do anything about it? No. I pushed through. I decided to ignore that sign from my body. And actually, I careered past quite a few other signs as well. So that feeling of waking up in the morning with a knot in my solar plexus, that feeling of worry on waking. And it got to the point that I then started to get very ill and I started getting kidney infections and chest infections. And that's when I realized that, okay, the stress of my job was taking a physical toll on my body. And I thought, I know, if I remove the stress, so if I remove the job, I'll solve all my problems. Wrong. That is not what happened. I did leave that job. It had been very emotionally and psychologically stressful. But what happened was that I just went into this kind of inability to get out of bed, low energy all the time. And all of those physical symptoms or physiological symptoms I was hoping would just snap back, did not. And what I realized when I started figuring out how to help myself was we need to support the body physiologically to get back to where we need it to be. Just stepping away and taking a break or time off isn't enough. So I did go to the doctor, obviously, with things like kidney infections. You cannot not go to the doctor. And the doctor just kept telling me all my test results were fine. There was nothing wrong with me. But I was 27 and I felt like an 87-year-old. I knew there was something wrong. And the problem here is that when we go to the doctor or we're looking for medical treatment, they can only treat you if you fall into the kind of disease state. If there is a medication they can give you that will help. And with the issue I had, there wasn't anything they could give me that was going to fix my issues. So I then started investigating on my own what could make me feel better. And I fell on the modality of nutrition. And so that's why I'm here today. So I'm a registered nutritionist, and it was burnout that spurred me into finding out more about food and how to support my body. And I now work with clients one-to-one to support them to get back to where they want to be, to get into optimal health. Because if you don't have an issue that a doctor can help you with because it's not bad enough, they're just waiting until you get to the point you can take a medication, you can feel a bit stuck and you can feel a bit lonely and you're not really sure where to turn. So it was while I was studying that I realized that a lot of symptoms that had been written off as normal when I was a teenager were in fact endometriosis. And for me, that chronic health condition actually contributed inevitably to burning out at the age that I did. So what is the solution if we're not able to get support from our doctor? Well, for me, what I do is I look at what is happening with your stress response. So I mentioned that we get physical symptoms when we're experiencing stress, but why does that happen? It's because there is a change in our stress response. And so for each individual that I work with, if stress is a big factor, we need to look into what is happening in your body to get you to where you want to be. And stress does not function in a vacuum. It's not just your stress response that's impacted, it's all your other body systems. And so when we think about hormones, for example, so if we feel that our hormones are out of balance, we want to know what's going on with them. And very often stress is playing an underlying role there, which as women we know, and very often it's brushed off, and that's incredibly frustrating. And another thing that's important to look at as well, I've got a little blood test tube here, is screening for things like nutrient deficiencies and things like that, because as we'll find out, that is a stressor for the body. So when we talk about stress, we think about psychological, emotional stress, but we also need to think about the things that are happening in our body that are contributing to stress, which we have potentially a little bit more control over. So what's happening? What's happening in the body? Our stress response has not evolved in line with technology. So previously, our stress response was there to keep us alive. It was there to keep us safe when we were in danger, if we needed to escape from a predator, if we needed to stay alive in a famine. It's the same response that kicks in when we're presenting to the C-suite, or if we're having to come up with a fun fact in an icebreaker, and we're getting that increased heart rate, that increased breathing, maybe we're getting sweaty palms. That's the stress response kicking in. And modern day stressors are kind of sprinkled through all day, every day. They're not something that is easy to evade. But the issue here is that our stress response works really well if there's an acute issue, if we are in danger and something needs to kick in and function really fast. But the stress response was designed to then cut off because we don't need it functioning at that level all the time. But if we're dealing with chronic stress, so lots of input all the time, the body can't handle levels of stress hormone flying around all the time. And so what happens is we can get put into standby mode. That's what I like to call it. And that's when the body's mechanisms kick in to reduce our stress hormones. So there are different stages of burnout. There's the superhero stage of burnout, and that stage is actually great. I'm not going to lie. And we kind of like dip in and out of it sometimes. And that's a stage where all our stress, you know, our cortisol is high. We feel like we're buzzing, we're super productive, we're getting loads of stuff done. Our body can't maintain that. And so what can then happen is either we support ourselves and we can kind of drift back into a healthier response, possibly if our workload reduces or the other things contributing to stress in our lives, you know, calm down. But what can happen is that we move into another stage of burnout, and that's when I look at people's test results, I call it the mountain range. And that's when we see peaks in stress response and then it drops off. And then we'll see another peak and then it drops off. And that's when we start to notice an impact on our daily rhythm. So if we're starting to have big slumps through the day, like bursts of energy and big slumps, and often if we're suffering with struggling to get to sleep in the evening and we're getting these racing thoughts, we might feel really tired, but our brain is really wired. And so that's another stage of the stress response. And then finally, and this is normally when people say burnout, they're referring to this last stage, and that's when our stress response kind of flatlines. And so we're not really having a big peak in cortisol at any point. And it's when we start to feel like we're struggling to get through the day. We're not jumping out of bed. We're maybe not getting out of bed at all. We're struggling with mood and all of those issues. And that's because our stress response is completely down regulated. So that's full standby mode. And we need to identify where we are in order to support our body kind of specifically to get back to where we want to be. So stress and our hormones. When I say hormones, as you probably will have assumed, I do mean estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So they sit at the top of my hormone pyramid here. But technically, hormones play into all of the functions in the body. So the blood sugar hormones, we're talking about insulin and glucagon. The stress hormones, we're talking about cortisol, thyroid hormones. These are all also technically hormones. And so they all interact with each other. So it's like an orchestra. If one thing is playing really badly, you're going to notice, and it's going to have an impact on all the other players. So my hormone hierarchy pyramid is designed to show that you need a really solid base to your pyramid in order to be able to support the layers on top of it. And I've got blood sugar at the bottom here, because if we're not supporting our blood sugar through eating well and eating healthy, balanced meals, what happens is we end up with these blood sugar spikes and these blood sugar dips. And what happens when our blood sugar dips too low is our stress response kicks in to bring our blood sugar back up, because the body thinks we're in danger. If our blood sugar is low, it's like, oh no, we might be in a famine. Or what happens if we need sudden energy? So it brings our blood sugar levels back up. So if we're already dealing with a lot of stress and our body is already pumping a lot of cortisol out, we do not want to add to that by not supporting with balanced meals. Then when we get to the next section of the pyramid, we've got the stress hormones, and healthy stress hormones provide the solid base for the thyroid and the sex hormones. And so we do really need to support the stress response. So healthy function from fight or flight and being able to move back into rest and digest in order for other things to function well. Now, coming to the thyroid, this is a big one for women, because very often what I see is people will come to me and they'll have something that's subclinical. It's not bad enough for a doctor to intervene, but it's bad enough that we start to have symptoms. And so we know something is wrong, but we're told you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, until suddenly you're prescribed medication. Now, the thyroid is super sensitive to stress because it's a Goldilocks scenario. So that's Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where she's looking for the porridge that's just right. You need the right amount of stress hormone, of cortisol, for the thyroid to really function at its best level, because too much and it will push your thyroid hormone into something your body can't use, and too little and the body will not activate your thyroid hormone. So we need stress, but we need it in the right amount. And you know, the thyroid drives the speed at which all the other cells work. And so if the thyroid isn't functioning well, it then has a knock-on effect to the sex hormones at the top, because we're not going to be making our estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone well if everything in the body has slowed down because the thyroid is not functioning well. So to give an example here, we might go to the doctor and actually be told, yes, you do have a thyroid issue, I want to give you thyroid hormone. What I sometimes see is that people will notice an improvement and then it plateaus, or they notice their symptoms start to come back. And that's because if all we're doing is supporting the thyroid part of the pyramid, we're still going to have the issues with the stress hormones and the blood sugar that could have contributed in the first place. By the same token, if we go to the doctor and we need support with, say, HRT, if we're not addressing what's going on underneath, so we're not addressing thyroid, stress, and blood sugar, what you might notice is that you'll see a benefit for a short period of time. You'll be like, oh my gosh, this stuff is amazing. I can't believe I didn't take it before. But those great results can start to plateau or drop off. So again, I ask you, what else have you changed? Because it may be that you need to go in and support those low levels of your pyramid to make sure that the top levels are really as strong and working as well as they can. Now, let's look at women's, well, I've got 3 examples here of women's health specific issues and the stress response. And what I wanted to look at is PCOS, endometriosis, and perimenopause, menopause. So firstly, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is an issue where we've got higher levels of androgens. They're called male hormones, but we all need them. So that's a ridiculous title. But higher androgens and possibly not ovulating on a regular basis. Now, about 70% of women who have been diagnosed with this condition suffer with something called insulin resistance, where our body is not responding to insulin the way it should. And so we have issues with blood sugar regulation. Now, we already know from what I've said before that means our stress response is going to be kicking in a lot more. And then that in turn kind of works in a vicious cycle. So if you have been diagnosed with PCOS, it's really important to look at the stress picture and the blood sugar management picture. For the women who don't have issues with insulin resistant PCOS, it's possible that your adrenal glands, which are responsible for making our stress hormones, could be playing a role anyway, because the adrenals can overproduce these androgens, the adrenal androgens, which is a driver in the condition as well. And if the adrenals are overfunctioning there, they will be pumping out stress hormones as well. So that's why with PCOS, we really want to address the stress picture. The next condition, endometriosis. So close to my heart, obviously, because I was diagnosed with it. This is an inflammatory condition. So it's bumped in with the female hormone issues, but ultimately there's an issue with the immune system here. But when there's a lot of inflammation going on, the stress response gets involved. And with endometriosis in particular, it's a condition where people tend to suffer a lot of pain. And whenever we're suffering pain, so this could be, in this instance, endometriosis, but migraine, injury, anything like that, if the body is suffering pain, that is stressful for the body. And so it releases cortisol to try and dampen that pain. So again, we have an issue with an overactive stress response here. So the next point is around perimenopause and menopause. So we need to remember what's happening here. In perimenopause, our hormone production from our ovaries and our womb is reducing, and the adrenals are taking the baton of hormone production. So it's never going to meet the same level. We're not expecting it to. Our hormones are designed to slowly reduce. We don't want to keep them at the high level that we have during our reproductive years. However, the adrenals are responsible for producing our stress hormones. So picture this. You're, mid 40s to mid 50s. You're probably at the peak of your career. You probably have family stresses of some kind. You're potentially worried about the health of your parents. You may have a young family of your own. And so already that's multiple things putting a stress on you psychologically. And then your adrenal glands are expected to start taking over production of testosterone and estrogen. That is a big ask. And so we really need to make sure that we're physiologically supporting the adrenal glands in that life stage to take the baton and reduce the symptoms associated with perimenopause and menopause. And then menopause, technically, it's a very finite moment. It's 12 months post your final period. So it's a very finite moment in time. And then after that, you're postmenopause. But we have lower levels of estrogen at that life stage, and estrogen is super protective for many different reasons. But a really key thing here is that you're then more susceptible to blood sugar regulation issues. So that means that you're at a higher risk of developing things like type 2 diabetes. And also, if the stress response starts getting involved, or we are operating with a high level of stress, we're going to have the issues associated with the stress-related symptoms, so higher blood pressure and things that start contributing to cardiovascular risk. So really, we need to consider stress at every life stage, is what I'm trying to say. So what can we do? Because we've heard about what can go wrong. So let's talk about what we can do now. I think we can all agree that perception of stress is outside of my wheelhouse, but hopefully that's a topic that you'll be exploring as well, getting support with how to cope with stress. But there's not so much we can do about external stressors, but what we can do is really support our physiology. So reducing the things that are going to be having an impact on our stress response that are going on inside the body. So nutrient deficiencies. This is a big one. The tricky thing here is when you go to a GP and they screen you, often they're looking at things that would mean that you're so deficient that you have a disease, like vitamin D levels, for example. The mark of what's considered healthy is making sure you don't have rickets. And I hope that you all have a slightly higher standard of health for yourselves. So I always screen for nutrient deficiencies with my clients. And the next one is so boring. Please don't be disappointed. But hydration. So in the 4.5 years I've been supporting clients, I've only had one person walk through the door that actually drinks enough water all the time. And it's because she works in skin health. And so it's very on brand for her. But prioritizing hydration is such an easy win that if you only take one thing away from today, just make sure that you're drinking enough water. And then my next first line intervention is thinking about what are we doing that's putting a strain on the adrenals. Now, the tricky thing here is that when we're very stressed, we often want to blow off steam, and that's completely normal. However, some of those activities can actually end up putting more stress on the body. So things like alcohol really depletes us of our B vitamins, and they're really important when we're stressed. Another thing is when we're eating lots of kind of sweet foods, that puts a big strain on the body, and it can put us, when we're spiking our blood sugar, we're going to have our stress response impacted. In addition, when we eat lots of sugar, our it uses up a lot of magnesium, and magnesium is another one that's really important for stress. Another thing is we start relying on caffeine when we start getting to the point where our stress response is not quite delivering the way that we want it to. We start relying on caffeine to keep us going and keep us firing. But caffeine actually prompts a cortisol spike. And if our body's already struggling with maintaining our cortisol throughout the day, we don't really want to be kind of taking out of a bank account that's already in the red for that. That financial references for you, Anya. And then
you for that.
You're welcome. And then another thing is that we can get a little bit rebellious when it comes to our sleep. So if we feel that our time belongs to everyone else in our lives, the evening is very much our time. And what I often see with clients is we get a bit naughty, or not naughty, but we push our bedtime back. We know that sleep is good for us, but we'll be like, oh, I just want to do this because I really want to do this now for me. But if this is watching and that next episode of This Is Us or another show that you're watching, is that actually going to be better for you tomorrow, or having that extra 45 minutes of sleep? And so it's a little bit kind of, we need to be a bit more disciplined with ourselves there. Now, next, so first line is, this is our triage. Then we've got prioritizing our parasympathetic nervous response. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. So we know fight or flight. We've all experienced fight or flight. We're all ambitious here. We need more rest and digest in our lives. And there's some really easy ways to do it. Some of them you may already know about and you've possibly been putting it off or avoiding, or you haven't had time. So I'm going to say yoga, and you're going to be like, oh, I know. If we don't have time to do a yoga class, then at least take the breathing from yoga, because that's what gets us into parasympathetic. If you just take a few deep breaths at your desk and make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale, that gets us into the parasympathetic response, which is what we want. So doing that a few times through the day is a really easy way to kick into parasympathetic a little bit. Another super easy one, splashing your face with cold water. You can go full Wim Hof, and you can do the cold showers and the cold exposure. That takes a bit more time, and you need to ease into it as well. You cannot just suddenly go into an ice cold shower. I do not recommend that. But cold water exposure is another way of getting into your parasympathetic response a bit more. Another really easy one is singing. Not easy in the office maybe, but maybe on your way in, like if you're in the car or you're singing in the shower, but singing, humming even, will help to stimulate what's called our vagus nerve, which helps to switch us into rest and digest mode. And then finally, and you'll know this, but you might not have treated yourself to one in a while, but massage. So if you haven't, take this as permission to book a massage right now. And specifically, apparently, foot rubs are the best way to do parasympathetic. So reflexology, maybe. So these are things to try and sprinkle, at least the short things, sprinkle throughout your day, and the longer ones, so maybe booking the yoga class or the massage weekly or monthly, just as much as you can manage to try and get your body used to switching into parasympathetic nerve response. And then finally, what kind of nutritionist would I be if I didn't mention food, right? So these are the foods that we need to really support our adrenal glands. So they're pumping our stress hormones out. I've circled in the top corner there protein, magnesium, vitamin C, and B vitamins, because that's what we use the most of. They produce our energy molecules. And when we're stressed, all of those things get used up more quickly. So making sure that you've got a sprinkling of all of these foods on a regular basis is going to be really important. One caveat is obviously things that are not essential for survival in the body get down-regulated when we're really stressed. So what gets prioritized is like muscles and blood pumping so we can run away. And what gets down-regulated is digestive system and reproductive system. And skin health. So that's one thing, is if you're having a lot of digestive symptoms, then you'll have to consider that as well alongside, and look at supporting that. Because if you're putting all of these foods in, but you're still having symptoms and you're still struggling, there is a bigger picture going on here. How can testing help? So I mentioned earlier that you have different stages of burnout. So if someone comes to work with me, what I really want to know is what is happening with their stress response. This graph here shows that the client is waking up with, they are the red line. So the red line is the client. They're waking up with high stress already. So that's probably, you know, the feeling I used to have with the knot in your solar plexus, that sudden waking. Then their stress response plateaus through the day, but it stays high in the evening. So they're having issues sleeping as well. This will require a different intervention than someone who's flatlining, which is where everything is along the black line at the bottom. And there's a different intervention again at someone who's kind of got the peaks. So I have seen someone with a morning reading that almost got to the top title there of daily free cortisol pattern. So their red line went right up to the top there. So it really varies for each individual, and figuring out what's going on for you is the most important thing. And finally, as I alluded to just now, the body, nothing works in a vacuum in the body. So actually, when I work with clients, I consider digestion, microbiome, as well as stress and hormones, which is what we've talked about today. And so if you're stressed and you're noticing flare-ups of other issues, like say you have psoriasis or eczema and it's really flaring up when you're stressed, there's more at play than just the stress response and hormones. So thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed being here, actually. And if you want to stay in touch, I've got my email address here and my Instagram. If anything I said resonated to the point that you think I need to talk to you immediately, I've got a QR code here, so you can book in a call, which is 30-minute complimentary call to talk through symptoms and to see whether one-to-one work would be a good next step for you. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Marjolein. Excellent presentation. Great advice that I think everybody here appreciates and everybody probably needs to hear. So thank you so much for sharing that. We'll be moving now to a Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or we'll go ahead and try to unmute everybody if anybody just wants to speak up and ask their questions. Definitely now is the time. So I'm just looking in our chat room. We don't have any written questions, but Marjolein, I'll start with my question. You know, it was interesting to see the kind of the hormone pyramid, that really nutrition is at the bottom. I haven't really thought about it that way, but it's definitely important to prioritize that. And you kind of showed us the different key foods, I guess, that are most important. So do you have any cool recipes or anything that you think everybody should be eating as far as interesting cuisine?
When we're, okay, it's not a recipe specific, but when we're stressed, everyone should be eating breakfast, which is a controversial opinion because everyone is a big fan of intermittent fasting. But if we're leaving really long gaps between our meals, that essentially leaves a big chance for your blood sugar to dip super low, and cortisol brings it back up again. And so if you're someone who you might not have an appetite early in the morning, and that in itself could be a symptom of stress, actually. Often I have clients who we get to breakfast a little bit further down the line, but ideally we're supporting ourselves from as early in the day as possible. If you're really healthy, well, actually, no, I'm going to caveat that. Women of reproductive age, so let's say kind of up to 45, 50, ideally we function best on breakfast. After that age, we get on better with intermittent fasting and having, you know, a longer wait. And men do really well on intermittent fasting. But stressed people and menstruating people do not do very well on skipping breakfast. So, hot take.
Absolutely, don't skip breakfast. we'll remember that. So as we're chatting, Marjolein, there is another question from Zara. She's asking if would you say constipation and IBS is stress related?
It can be. So what I would also consider, so one, yes, it can be stress related. Another, if you've always suffered with constipation, then it could also be a sign that your thyroid is not functioning very well. So I would maybe ask some of the other women in your family specifically if they have any thyroid issues. And IBS especially can flare up when we are stressed, and that's because the stress response is our survival mechanism, and so the body wants to prioritize keeping safe, being as light as possible, being able to escape, and so it gets rid of anything it doesn't need, and that includes kind of often quick evacuation of the bowels. And so if you notice that your IBS flares up when you're very busy or nervous, it can be good nervous as well. It could be like you're excited about a holiday, or excited about a date or something like that. But if you're noticing that that's when your IBS is flaring up, it could definitely be stress related. I would also say you would want to look at the microbiome, so the balance of the bacteria, because that can really play a role in if you're experiencing either constipation or diarrhea. And so often we're told by a doctor, you have IBS, you just need to live with it. But actually, we can look at the makeup of the microbiome and see if that is playing a role, especially if you've had a history of a lot of antibiotics in the past and or medication of any sort.
Thank you for that answer, Marjolein. I'm sure Sarah really appreciates that. So just a quick note that if you do have a question you want to ask live as opposed to writing it out, just raise your hand. We do have a comment just from Candy that she's been a reflexologist for 6 years, and she can really relate to what you're talking about, Marjolein. So really positive comment there.
Everyone needs to book in with Candy immediately to get that sympathetic nerve response done.
Exactly. Now, we do have another question here from Haley, and she asked, would you say that nausea can be hormonal related? Over the past years, as she's aged, she's noticed she gets really nauseous for many days per month. So, and there's no chance that she's pregnant.
Yeah, don't worry. That's never my first question. The doctor, when they're like, is there a chance you could be pregnant? When was your last period? So with the nausea, what I would say would be interesting for you is to track it along with your cycle. So figure out which days you're really affected. What happens when we have a couple of hormone peaks during our monthly cycle? So, and I'm thinking of estrogen specifically here. So you've got one that is just before you ovulate, you have an estrogen peak, and then you have another estrogen peak kind of about 7 days after ovulation. And your liver is responsible for breaking the estrogen down after it's done its job. So if the liver is compromised, so it's dealing with a lot of fallout from the gut, or you have increased even supplements can put a strain on the liver actually, but you've increased supplements or medication or chemical exposure in general. And that's something that mounts as we age, because especially as women, we're marketed so many different products that we put on our skin, on our hair. We wash, this is not just women, but as in the chemicals that we use in our house to clean, that kind of stuff, it all puts a burden on us. And so those times in the month when you're feeling really nauseous, see if it correlates with those estrogen peaks. And it might just be that the liver needs a bit more support, because a really common sign of that is nausea. So either liver or bile is struggling.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Marjolein. Great response. I do have a question from just generally, I was wondering, when you work with women one-on-one, how does this work? How do you start, and how does the process look like for those that are interested in getting together with you? I was just curious how that works.
So it starts with a very low, I was going to say low stress. I hope the whole process will be low stress, but a no obligation call just to talk through how you're feeling, what your symptoms are, and figuring out whether I am the best person to help, because I am not always the best person to help, but I will always try and signpost you on so you are not lost and feeling alone. Based on that call, we can decide whether testing would be helpful. So I look most often at comprehensive blood testing, hormone testing that looks at your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, your adrenals, so your stress response, and your liver pathways to break your hormones down. And then the microbiome and digestion part of it, if that's relevant. So to give you an example, someone who has symptoms of PCOS and there's a condition called PMDD, which is where you're suffering with a lot of issues of clinical depression or anxiety, but only in the 2 weeks before your period, and the rest of the month you feel like a different person. So in those cases, the hormone test is really helpful. In endometriosis, the hormone test is helpful as well, but most importantly, I want to know about the microbiome, because it's really relevant with the immune response and inflammation and things like that. So it really depends on people's goals and their main client pictures. If we do go ahead with testing, then we do consultations on a monthly basis. So that will be an hour session every month. And then every week we don't speak, we will speak on the phone. So essentially it's about designing protocols that are easy to implement for you. So it's based on what you eat normally and making tweaks to that, rather than me being like, this is what you eat now. I try and work with what stage everybody's at. And then it's also about using the test results to feed into the protocols, and recommending supplements if and when they're appropriate and for a set period of time. And then also the weekly calls are really for accountability and to understand, what's going on. Therefore, if any new symptoms have cropped up, or if everything has fallen off, that if all the wheels have fallen off, it's just for me to say, it's okay, this happens, just make sure you're drinking enough water, and then you can get back on next week. So it's really just to support people as well while they make change, because it's not easy to make change, and so having someone in your corner reminding you why it's important as well is really helpful.
Absolutely. So kind of like a coach by your side as you're into the new habits.
Yeah, a little bit.
Healthy habits. Yeah, great. Now, there is another question here about whether there is such a thing as an ideal diet.
Yes, but it's different for everyone. So no, yes and no. Essentially, what you want is you want a diet that's going to really support the microbiome. So you want a lot of diversity of plant foods, but you also want to make sure that you're getting healthy levels of protein, and that depends on each person. So normally protein requirements are based on weight, how much physical activity you do, and that kind of thing. But with all food recommendations, you need to look at the individual as well. Like, is there a family history of having issues with fat digestion, and why is that? Do we need to look at making sure that they're having, some people can get away with a more unhealthy diet, and other people have to play it a lot closer to kind of healthy rules. And that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I'll use me as an example. So when I do the hormone test, with the first time I did it, which was a few years ago, my results were absolutely terrifying. There was a lot of there's a lot of red on there, meaning like my estrogen was really high, my progesterone was high as well, which was interesting. My stress hormones were messy, but also the way that my liver processed my estrogen was very unhealthy. And that, yes, part of that is lifestyle, but part of that is also inevitably genetics for me, because I then made a lot of lifestyle changes. I did the same test again, and I got much healthier results. I don't drink anymore. That's not the only reason why I don't drink, but it is a factor. And so I saw a big improvement, but there were still issues with how my liver processes estrogen. And so for me, it's really important to make sure I get enough brassica vegetables, for example, on a daily basis. It's not something that I can be like, oh, I'll have broccoli once a week. I need to eat them more often, because my body is a bit, I don't want to say faulty, because it's my body, it's fine, I'm happy with it, but it has this predisposition, and so I need to make those considerations with everyone that I work with. So I'm really sorry that there's no clear answer on that. But the ideal diet for you is the one that you can stick to, because sometimes people do things that are really restrictive, and they'll see results initially, but then they cannot maintain that restriction, and then there's stress around food, and that can drive symptoms as well, because stress impacts your body, right? I hope that's what everyone's taken away. So it's one that you can stick to and that you feel good doing, as well. It's not just about sticking to what's super healthy all the time.
Absolutely. So very much an individual take on what that ideal diet will be.
Yeah.
Now, there's a really great positive comment here from Anita that I want to share, because she said that she really enjoyed your presentation, of course, Marjolein, but she also said that she likes your mention of splashing water in the face and singing, and the long out breaths are also important. So I think this is absolutely great advice. That's something we need to be reminded of, and really, really great advice for just better well-being for all of us, something that we should definitely be remembering. I see lots of positive comments in the chat room. Lots of thanks, Marjolein, for just excellent information that you shared with us today. So again, thank you for the practical advice and for being here with us. I don't see any other additional questions, unless there's anything else you'd like to share with us, Marjolein.
All I want to say is that you know your body best, and if you know there's something wrong, you deserve to be listened to, and there is someone who's out there who can help you. So especially at the moment when it can be more difficult to get the support we need from our doctors, just know you're not imagining it. Just keep stay strong, and keep looking for that support, and you will find it, as difficult as that can be. But yeah, you deserve to get the support that you need in whatever condition or whatever symptoms that you're dealing with.
Absolutely. Never give up. Keep searching for the solution. Definitely agreed. Marjolein, thank you so much for just a great session with us today, and thank you everyone for attending. Of course, if you do have questions and you'd like to get in touch, feel free to contact Marjolein or myself over email, but Marjolein will be the one definitely answering questions on nutrition and well-being and all the topics discussed today. And you have her email here. We'll also send out a follow-up email with a recording of this session, a copy of the presentation, in case if you wanted to review this again. And then that will be coming out soon. As far as our next quarterly workshop, we'll have that on Wednesday, October 5th. That will be at 4 p.m. Central Eastern Time. And during that time, we'll have another guest with us, Magda from Work Ally. She'll be talking about career development and finding a fulfilling career. Also part of well-being generally, because we want to have a fulfilling career, but from a different perspective. So we'll post a link to that in our LinkedIn group shortly. If you're not a part of the group yet, be sure to join us. We'll include the link in the follow-up email. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you during our next session. Thank you.
Thanks, Anya.